Welcome to Highlight Reel number 5, Tribe and Territory. We are talking about two of the most significant areas that generate the most violence throughout human history. We go to war for our people and for our place, for our space. And this has led to so much violence. Jesus redefines the concepts and leads us into a different kind of fight, a fight for the spaces that divide us, rather than fighting for our own space so that we can be divided against you. In summary, we could say it this way. Jesus undoes the common religious identification of genetics and geography, because we know religion often fans the flame of this kind of violence. Uniting diverse people together as fellow citizens, soldiers, and ambassadors of his kingdom. To bring unity, he must help his followers embrace the radical idea of enemy love. Jesus teaches us how to love God, love our neighbor as we love ourselves, and to love our enemies. There's no one left not to love. And this concept of enemy love is one of those things about Jesus that is completely unprecedented and unparalleled. You just can't find it anywhere else in any other philosophy or religious teaching. Jesus helps us humanize rather than dehumanize the villains in our lives. Even if they are dehumanizing us, we will not fight fire with fire. And as we see them as holistic human beings, we see their value and their worth. And because they're valuable, we don't just let them walk all over us with their violence. We initiate love and compassion as a way of practicing ethical shock treatment, of giving them the opportunity to see us as humans, to humanize us. It might not always work, but we are committed to giving them the gift of that possibility. So Jesus teaches, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, the lex talionis. It was taught, it was the law to retaliate in limited way. And so it had its place, it had its purpose. But Jesus says, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. The word resist here, the Greek word, is a military term, meaning do not resist them violently. Do not fight fire with fire. It doesn't mean be completely passive. Do not resist an evil person with the kind of violence that they're perpetrating toward you. Rather, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other also. He specifies the right cheek. If there's a reason for this, it's not just poetry or trying to create some vivid detail for the imagination. If someone is striking you, the assumption would be with the right hand. Unless stated, the right hand was always the default in ancient culture and ancient literature. The left hand was the bad hand. It's the poo-poo hand. The right hand is the hand you initiate things with. So if someone strikes you on the right cheek, he says, so that's the right hand to the right cheek. If I punch this way, it's going to be your left cheek. In order for me to use my right hand to strike your right cheek, it's going to have to be a backhanded slap, the slap of slavery, the slap of provocation of one who is above you, who says, you mean nothing to me. You're not even worth the fight. And I know you won't fight back, so I can slap you thus. If someone slaps you, he says, it's not a punch even. It's a backhanded slap, clearly. The slap of a master to a slave. He says, turn to them the other also. What does that do? It says, if you're going to now throw a slap, why don't you throw a punch and punch me as a fellow human being then? Is that really what you want to do? A backhanded slap, I'm not just a slave. I'm a human being to you. I'm not going to fight you back, but I'm going to invite you to fight me then as one who is not an inferior, but an image bearer of God. It's ethical shock treatment. It's a moment that gives the perpetrator a chance to humanize the victim. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. In first century Israel, you had 2 layers of clothing. That's it. There were no long johns, no underpants. There's your shirt and your coat. And he's saying if someone takes you to court and that's all you've got, and they're suing you for one of them, well, first of all, if they're initiating any legal proceedings, they've got the money and they're just trying to intimidate. And they're going to try and sue you for half of your clothing that's on your back right there and then. Give them the whole thing. Say, you must then be so needy right now. You must be so desperate. Here, if you need this, let me give you this as well. And in the process, you're now standing naked in court. And of course, it's part of ancient Hebrew culture that it was shameful not only to be naked, but to look upon someone else's nakedness. This is ethical shock treatment. If you need it this much, here, let me offer it to you. It's a chance to say, do you see what you're doing? Do you see the fight that you're bringing to try and get every last little bit of something from me? Here, let me give it to you. It gives, again, the one who is suing an opportunity to humanize the victim and say, yeah, what am I doing here? Lastly, he says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. And within first century Israel, Romans were allowed, the occupying force at the time, Romans were allowed to conscript any citizen nearby and force them to carry their gear for 1 mile. And that was a limiting law, but they were certainly allowed to do that. Can you imagine just walking around in the time of occupation by Rome? And you'd hate to ever make contact with a Roman soldier, right? Just in case they might say, you there, carry my gear. It's, oh, I just wanted to go to the market to grab some peaches. And, and I'm, oh, there's a Roman. Don't look at me, don't look at me, don't make eye contact, don't make eye contact. And then finally, you there, rats. Now I've got to carry his gear for 1 mile. And he's the enemy, and he uses that gear to oppress my people. So what do? I carry it the 1st mile because the 1st mile, yes, is slavery, but I carry it the 2nd mile because the 2nd mile is freedom. Now, at the end of that mile, the Roman soldier says, all right, give me my gear back. Who else am I going to say is going to carry it the 2nd mile? But we say, no. Mr. Roman soldier, sir, I'd be happy to carry it 1 more mile. Well, now you're putting him in an interesting scenario because what you are doing by freedom is causing him to have to relate to you as a human being. You're relating to him as a human being. You're humanizing your oppressor as a person who actually just has some stuff that needs help. He needs help to have it carried. You're humanizing him, gives him an opportunity to humanize you. What are you going to talk about for that mile as you walk along? What is he going to be thinking as you walk along for that next mile? Well, this is amazing and creative. And it makes changes in human psyches. It gives people a gift. How do we get started at this? Jesus says in Luke chapter 6, he says, but to you who are listening, I say. In other words, for those of you who are really going to pay attention to this, and I realize that for some of us, we just don't have ears to hear this. This seems too radical for us. But for those of you who can really hear this, let me say, love your enemies. And he gives us 3 ways of doing this. Do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Do good, bless, pray. First is action. Second is blessing, it's communication. And then thirdly is prayer. And if you notice, if you rank those in order, action and then speaking and then praying, they respond to an order of aggression against you. Jesus says we're to do good. But who do we do good to? Those who merely hate us. You say just merely. They merely hate you at this point. They haven't done anything to you. They just hate you. While you're able to do good towards them, do it. Do all the good you can for the people who hate you. Then he says, speak well of the people who speak against you. Bless the people who are cursing you. So they've now upgraded their violence from just emotional violence to verbal violence. They not only just hate you, now they curse you. So you are unable, perhaps, to do good to someone, to actually physically bless them in some way, to do good for a person who's busy cursing you. So you simply bless them back. Then finally, they upgrade their violence to action. To those who mistreat us, we're called to simply pray for them. At that point, they are not going to hear our blessing. They are not going to be able to respond to some good that we're doing for them. All we have left is prayer, but that'll be enough, and we will pray for them. But where do we start in all of this? We start at that first level, where they merely hate us, we can do the most good. We, those who follow Jesus, are a movement of people who are looking to build bridges rather than just angry tweet against people we don't like. We are looking for ways to build bridges and actually serve the needs of those people who can't stand us, and are beginning to use ethical shock treatment to give people a chance to humanize their enemy as we humanize our enemy. Sometimes Christians, well, certainly throughout history, Christians have said, that's a lovely ideal, but there's no way we could follow it, so why bother trying? Or they've said, maybe Jesus was just setting such a high ideal, He was preaching really the equivalent of Old Testament law, something we'll never be able to endure. And really, the new covenant hadn't come yet. He hadn't died on the cross. So this doesn't apply to how Jesus actually wanted his followers to live, even though this is how his followers interpreted his teaching for the first 300 years of the Christian movement. Some people have said, well, it's for a special few, this kind of teaching, for monks and nuns who will go away. They're like the spiritual superstars of the Christian movement. They'll go away and they'll live this out, this life of a peacemaker, while the rest of us will go to war and be regular citizens of the country. Is that really what Jesus had in mind? Is this two-strata version of Christianity? I don't think we can build a case for that. We don't do that with his other teaching. It's like our mind is racing to find some excuse not to simply follow what Jesus said. Sometimes Christians have pointed to passages like Romans 13, which talks about God working through the state, through government, through war, through the violence of the government to bring about his will. Very true, Romans 13. But what we sometimes forget is that Romans 13 is the continuation of a conversation that started in Romans 12. Romans 12 talks about how the church, that's believers, not a separate institution, but that's us, those of us who follow Jesus, how the church is called not to participate in any form of violence or revenge. That's our calling, which raises the question, is God not going to bring about any justice in this world? Are we all going to have to wait until we die to see justice? And Paul partially answers that question by saying, in this world, God will bring about a measure of justice through government. That'll be God working through government. They bear the sword. But he's already said, you're not to bear the sword. You're not to be a part of that. Vengeance is not yours, it's God's. And God can work that out through the state, but not through you. Well, it raises the question, can't I switch hats sometimes be an agent of the church and sometimes be an agent of the state? What do you think Jesus would say? Do you say, well, sometimes follow my teaching as the church, but sometimes ignore that so you can follow the way of the state? I don't think so. Sometimes Christians have said, yeah, but I've got to be a good, decent citizen of my country. But of course, before you are a Canadian, you're a Christian. Before you are an American, a member of any kingdom of this world, you are a citizen of heaven. And there are certain ways of living as a citizen of heaven that you are called to. Your first and primary relationship with the country that you live in is to be an ambassador. You're a foreign ambassador from another country to America, to Canada, to whatever country you're in. You are an ambassador representing a different will and a different way, the way of Jesus. And that is going to change how we relate to the violence of our land. In fact, the very two words that are used to describe what a Christian is not to do in Romans 12 are the very two words that says this is what the state will do, and God will work through it. But you, we've already been told, are to have no part of that. One of my favorite movies of all time is Hacksaw Ridge. Did you see it? Hacksaw Ridge is, I just want to recommend it to you. That's all. We interrupt this session for a quick announcement. Hacksaw Ridge, great movie. Go see it. Get some good homework. It'll raise some great discussion. And I know that this raises all kinds of questions. And I happen to be a pacifist. That's my background. I was interviewed on a television show in the States, a Christian talk show. And the commentator, before we went to air, she had read my book, which gives her some credit because I think sometimes I understand when someone's doing interviews after interviews after interviews, they don't have time to read all their guests' books. They need someone else to maybe summarize it for them, do a quick flip. But she had read it pretty thoroughly. And she said, wait a minute, Bruxy, it's this chapter that gives me a problem. She says, are you telling me that Christians aren't to be soldiers and to fight for their country or to use violence to bring about good? I mean, what about, she had a whole list of great questions, and they're good questions. I assured her that to be a pacifist is not to be passive, first of all. Jesus doesn't give us that option. It's not to do nothing. Pacifism comes from the root word meaning to pacify, to work to bring about peace. But my suggestion is, looking at the teaching and the example of Jesus, we are called to work to bring about peace in a way that is itself peaceful, where the ends and the means are aligned. I think this is the way of Jesus. But I understand this is going to be an area of great discussion for us, and I hope you enjoy that discussion. I think the even fact we're processing this is very honoring to the teaching of Christ. Well, grace and peace.